Time is tight. Our list of questions is long. We'll begin with Laura Tingle from the Australian Financial Review.
Treasurer, if I could just get you to summarise all those fabulous graphs and figures. The tax task for the budget will be, in those circumstances, is to just basically still get a bit of a tax mix, which I address bracket creep by other tax measures, but not produce a substantial change in tax as a proportion of GDP in the circumstances of real and nominal growth. And on the spending side, you're basically saying that the coalition spent $70 billion after saving 80. I mean, if you look through the list of things that you spent it on, because you're also talking about the benefits of trade agreements and infrastructure, $1 billion of it was on extra road funding. True. There's about $6 billion on the free trade agreement with Japan. There was a change in welfare packages, which I think you actually oversaw, which cost $1.8 billion. Where did the coalition go wrong, if that's the right way to characterise it, and how will you be able to change all of that new spending that just comes up in the future?
Well, I think if the first part of your question summarised what I was saying, I don't think we went wrong at all. What I think I've outlined to you is what has been the first phase, and the first phase was to arrest the growth in spending. I mean, if we hadn't done what has been achieved to date, then the figures on deficits would be far worse, far worse. You can just add tens and tens of billions of dollars, and it would be taking us even further and further away from the place we want to be. So my point was not to say that that $70 billion was not well spent. I mean, all of those measures received a great deal of analysis. I mean, infrastructure, yes, absolutely. But the point I was making, though, is that in every case, we were able to identify savings to cover the spend. And that has been the budget rule that we have honoured over that period of time. If there were new things that we wanted to do or had to do, whether it was increased security costs, our position in Iraq or anything like this, we've had to cover it off by doing the hard work of savings. It is in our view that we should be doing it by revenue measures. I mean, if you look at our savings and revenue measures to address the budget, our savings measures are 4 times what the revenue measures is. If I look at what our opponents are doing, their revenue measures, their increases in taxes are 20 times what their savings measures is. So I think that gives you a pretty clear contrast between the tax and spend model of our opponents and the lower tax, lower spending model of this government.
Sid Mark from The Australian.
Mr Morrison, if I was a state treasurer and I just heard your speech, I would be starting to tighten my belt. It seems to me that you have just flagged to the states that the buckets of money that they get from the federal government will be smaller in the next budget, and it also seems to me that that people who receive money in the fastest growing areas of government spending are going to also be the subject of potential cuts. So could you just expand on that for me, please?
What I've talked about today, Sid, is new spending, curbing the growth of new spending, new asks, new commitments, new growth in spending and how those things can be curbed. The government, of course, will honour all the commitments we have in terms of current spending arrangements as they've been worked up with the states and territories. And I think to suggest that those are under review would be a wrong interpretation to make from what I've said. What I'm saying is the pressures on the budget going forward are increasing, and there will be new asks for new spends. And these are the areas where we need to look for different answers rather than just asking the taxpayer to stump up. I mean, it would be great if the federal government could go to the global government and say, well, we've got these pressures and we would like the global government to raise a tax to give us more money. We don't have that option. We're a sovereign government. Other sovereign governments, I'm saying, don't have that option either.
Mark Riley from Network 7.
Mark Riley from the 7 Network, Treasurer. In the negative gearing debate, I think people are hearing that both sides of politics are looking at the way that they can gear their losses against income. Are you also doing that with business, the way the business gears its losses against its income? Are you looking at that the same way, just as a matter of fairness? And as a principle in that, Labor's saying that whatever changes it makes to negative gearing, whether it be the policies for first only to allow people to gear new houses or new property and they would grandfather existing investments. What's your position on that? Do you also believe that any changes should not affect existing investments and only future investment strategies?
Well, I'm not announcing our policy on negative gearing today, and those measures, should they be considered further and how they'll be addressed, well, there'll be an appropriate time to announce that. But in terms of how I've always described my attitude towards negative gearing, I've always understood that for the vast majority of Australians who use negative gearing, they are modest income-earning Australians, nurses, teachers, police. Now, I know the Labor Party doesn't agree with that, and I know there are probably some in this room who don't agree with that and have openly challenged that. But the figures speak for themselves. 2/3 of those who use negative gearing have a taxable income of $80,000 or less. 70% own just one property, and 70% have a net rental loss of less than $10,000. Now, it is one of the few opportunities that people on modest incomes have to try and get ahead, and they've taken advantage of that. And I say to them, good luck to them, and good on you. I don't think you're the problem. I don't think you're the problem why the budget's in peril. I don't think people who are making those difficult decisions to try and provide their future are the problem. The difficulty I've got with what the Labor Party have proposed is this. A, they don't understand that principle, because what they've proposed will actually disadvantage those on modest incomes getting in negative gearing more than those on higher incomes. I think it'll actually increase the disequity in the system, not alleviate it. Because every person now, that nurse 5 years from now who decided that they were going to try and do that, they will have that opportunity cut off, so they'll just have to go out to the new estate or where they're selling them off the plan, and they'll be competing with every dentist from Bellevue Hill, who has 6 properties and 7 properties, all due respect to dentists from Bellevue Hill, or dentists from other places, or doctors, or those on high income. I don't want to discriminate particularly against any particular profession. But my point is this: they're going to have to compete with a lot more people who are chasing the same tax benefit, and they'll be chasing for a smaller pool of assets to do it. And those who are just trying to get ahead run the great risk of being crowded out. So the Prime Minister and I just don't think they've thought it through. I don't think they get who actually uses this and why they do it. And any measures that we would consider would be designed to ensure that those who really are doing this just simply to get ahead and have modest incomes, that we would seek to mitigate, indeed limit or remove any impact on them at all.
Just briefly on that, you said...
Sorry?
Business tax gearing?
Well, business taxes are different to what negative gearing. I mean, we're talking about householders and we're talking about businesses involved in business activity, and there's quite a good argument for why those things are treated separately.
Just briefly on that, you said you're not going to announce your negative gearing policy today.
No.
So you have a negative gearing policy.
No, I think that's a contortion of what I've said. Chris, as shocked as I am that you have sought to contort it in that way.
Peter Martin from The Age.
Good. So you might yet have one. I think that's... You signalled spending cuts. You're in the middle of the budget process right now. Are the conceivable spending cuts those that are at all likely anywhere near big enough to fund significant income tax cuts?
What I've signalled, Peter, is controlling new spending. That's what I've signalled. And, I mean, you've described that as spending cuts. What I'm saying is we're looking to control new spending. It's a very similar model that was employed by John Key in New Zealand and other places. Every day, Matthias and I have ideas put to us for people to spend more money, whether it's from our colleagues or from the states and territories. What I'm saying is we have to exercise great discipline and restraint in terms of new spending and ensure we continue to keep the tension in the cord on our existing levels of spending. So I think that's a very different proposition to the one that you've outlined in your question.
So we can take it from that then that what you do on spending will not be enough to fund significant income tax cuts?
The spending reductions that we would seek to achieve by controlling new spending is designed to deal with the deficit. The issues in relation to tax that we would have under consideration would be designed to try and reduce taxes in other areas. Okay, so the difference between us and Labor is Labor will put up taxes on negative gearing, they'll put up taxes on tobacco, they'll put up taxes on the earnings phase, the retirement phase of your superannuation, which is effectively a retrospective tax, something that the Leader of the Opposition said he was against just the other day. They're going to do all that to do one thing, not to cut your tax, but to increase spending. Now, they are in the high tax, high spend club. I'm not a member.
Michelle Grattan from The Conversation.
Michelle Grattan, The Conversation. Mr Morrison, for years the experts, including the former head of the Treasury, have been telling us that the switch in tax from direct to indirect was vital, including economically vital, and yet the modelling produced last week just couldn't stack up that argument. Can you explain why this is so? Why this gap between what we've been told before, what we now find? Is it explained by the absence of the company tax cut in that modelling, or were the experts wrong before? How do you explain it?
Well, what the modelling did show was there was a growth dividend of between 0 and 0.3%. And what no modelling will ever do, and John has made this point, he made estimates the other day, others have made this point about modelling, is that it never takes in to account the subsequent year-on-year behavioural impacts that can also contribute to growth. That's why I've been careful to say that when we finally came to a considered view on this, it wasn't just the modelling. What the modelling showed was at the minimum level of what the potential growth impact was. Now, it was modest, and if you're able to take into account the other things, it would have been higher than that. So I think the principles that were set out by former Treasury Secretaries remain very accurate. The issue is in the implementation, and the issue is when your compensation bill swamps the gains. And one of the reasons we've got that problem is because we are increasingly becoming a country of those who pay taxes and those who have taxes spent on them.
Colin Brinston, AAP.
Colin Brinston, AAP. Thank you for your speech, Treasurer. In these turbulent economic times, have you given any consideration to who you're going to replace retiring Glenn Stevens with? Now, obviously, we're going to need a steady hand at the till, and you obviously have great admiration for him. Is there any chance you could get the rock star of central bankers, your words, not mine,
Sure.
to do another encore?
Now, as far as I know, Glenn has great plans to spend more time in our beloved Shire, where we both live, and spend time out on Port Hacking, I'm sure, or Georges River with his family. He's announced that, I think, very clearly, and the government will consider the new appointment in the appropriate way, and when a decision is made on that, then we'll be making that public in the appropriate time.
Lenore Taylor from The Guardian Australia.
Lenore Taylor, Guardian Australia. I take it from your speech that you're saying pretty clearly to the states that they're going to have to meet the looming funding shortfall for hospitals by themselves without federal assistance. If that's the case, how do you think they should fix it? If by raising their own taxes, doesn't that fall foul of your our mantra that we shouldn't tax and spend our way to jobs and growth? And if by using their own surpluses or cutting their own expenditure, how does that fit with what we've been told for many years, that the rising cost of hospitals because of the ageing population and more expensive treatments will eat up the entire state's budgets in the longer term? How can they possibly do it by spending cuts?
Well, we're all sovereign governments. The decision was taken with bipartisan support some years ago to introduce the NDIS, and that is going to have a very significant impact on the outlays of this government over the back end of the next 10 years. And that will start forcing outlays to GDP to start climbing. And it's our job to accommodate that, to swallow that, to absorb it, and to make sure it's delivered. And we'll need to make the adjustments in our own expenditure, as we are, to ensure that we can accommodate what is a very worthy initiative. We also need to make sure that it is framed and run in such a way as that its costs don't blow out, and that some of the apocalyptic projections about what could potentially happen in that area don't come to pass. And it goes to the point. I mean, in no business in this country would anyone just accept someone walking into their office and saying, the increase in cost is 8%, give me the cheque. I mean, we all have to manage our budgets. The states, almost without an exception, one or two, are in surplus at present. And we all have to work within our budgets and manage the responsibilities that we have. Now, we'll work constructively with the states and territories, and the Prime Minister is doing that, and I'm doing that. And there are some things we're still looking at in this territory. But what I'm saying is the simple proposition that the costs are going up, therefore taxes have to go up, is not a proposition that I think bears scrutiny. There are always other options, and we need to look at those options, both as state governments and as a federal government. Well, I don't run the state governments. The state governments need to deal with their issues and we need to deal with ours. And that's what we're going to do. I don't think states are branch offices of the Commonwealth. I think they are sovereign governments. I'm a federalist at heart. And I think state governments need to run their own show. And if, I said this in my maiden speech, the answer to some of the problems we were seeing back in 2007 in the New South Wales government under Labor is not to get the federal government to run it all. It was to get rid of a bad state Labor government. That's how it works in this country. They should do a good job, and if they don't do a good job, then they should toss them out and put in a government that will do a good job.
Can I just check in with you, Treasurer? We've got a few more questions to come. We did go over a bit in the speech. Are you happy to take a few more? That's right. So can we go now to Andrew Provan from the West Australian?
Treasurer, 11 years ago there was this precocious backbencher called Malcolm Blythe Turnbull. He produced this paper with hundreds of ideas for tax reform. One of his things he was keen on was scrapping tax deductions and paying for modest tax reform and tax cuts. They were worth about $10 billion in 2005. They're now worth $20 billion. To use your language, how much of that $20 billion is excessive and which are to be trimmed?
Well, I initiated through the House of Representatives Committee on Economics an inquiry into these very issues, and they're conducting their inquiry now, and I look forward to hearing back from them. I mean, Craig Laundy was previously chairing that committee, and obviously there'll be a new chair appointed when the Parliament resumes next week, and I'll await the outcome of their inquiry. I think that's the appropriate way to go. But I should stress that it's actually $5 billion in potential revenue from the sorts of things that you're talking about. It's not $20 billion. It's $5 billion a year in actual revenue. Unless you were talking about it over the budget and forward estimates, but on an annual basis it's about $5 billion. But look, that's a live issue that is the subject of a House of Representatives inquiry, and I think that's a good thing, and the reason I think that is I asked them to do it.
Treasurer, I'm sure you're old enough to remember this, but wait, there's more. Tim Shaw from Radio 2CC.
Treasurer Tim Shaw, 2CC Breakfast. Thank you for your address. Big issue on Talk Radio this morning was affordability of housing. A family of 5 bought 8 acres of land in New South Wales because the 2-bedroom apartment in Canberra was more expensive. So, on your theme of backing Australians in, how do you help back Australians into affordable housing, and how can you work with those sovereign state and territory governments to achieve that goal?
Well, there have been 2 things that have happened more in my home state, less so in other places. But the issue of housing largely, at the end of the day, comes down to supply and demand. And the supply restraints that have been present around the country for many years now are largely responsible for what we've seen happening with housing prices around the country. And it was one of the recommendations of the Harper Review, which said that that should be one of the subjects of the productivity reforms. And that's why we quickly moved to say that's right. And we need to set up a system of competition-style payments as was done previously to incentivise the sort of changes that would be necessary to free up, I think, the supply restrictions that are there in the housing market. That's one important area. On the area of investors, the APRA have already introduced measures, we know, last year, which tightened the lending criteria by banks into that market. And as the Governor noted just last week, that has had the desired effect of easing some of the pressure in those hotter markets. What the opposition said the other day, I mean, they've got a start date in July of 2017. If they are elected, well, fire the gun. Everybody will be going to every single auction they can find to snap up as much property as they can in the 6 or 12 months that there might be before the measure coming in. I mean, I thought that transition arrangement was quite peculiar. But putting that to one side, I mean, it really comes down to an issue of supply and demand. In terms of affordable housing, when I was Social Services Minister, I saw this. I think the responsibilities around affordable accommodation have become very confused. I mean, the Commonwealth and the states spend around $11 billion on housing support in this country. And frankly, I couldn't point to too much of it that is doing a great job. And that includes, you know, the Commonwealth Rental Assistance, which is growing and it is helping less and less people as time goes on. And it's time, I think, to really try and rethink that with the states. And that has been part of the genuine discussion, some of the real positives discussions we've been having with the states and territories. There's no simple answer to that, but there is $11 billion being spent right now, which could be spent a lot better. Wouldn't cost us an extra cent. I suspect it could cost us less if we could sort out some of the issues between the states and the Commonwealth about how genuine affordable housing housing support could be delivered. Now, again, I pay tribute to the New South Wales Government, who are doing some really exciting things in affordable housing, in freeing up old stock to develop new stock, working with the private sector to ensure that's delivered at affordable levels in important parts of the city. It's great work that Brad Hazzard has done, and I mightn't agree with everything with Mike Baird, but I certainly agree with him what he's doing there.
Time is getting on, so our broadcasters know where we're heading. We'll take 3 more questions and then finish. So, Bernard Keane from Crikey.
Bernard Keane from Crikey, Treasurer. Thank you for your address. In your remarks, you mentioned the hard work of Andrew Robb, obviously in relation to relation to trade agreements such as the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and you referred to made what I think was a very interesting description of leading to generations of prosperity. The Productivity Commission, which is in your portfolio, repeatedly asked to be able to conduct a full independent assessment, a cost-benefit analysis of the TPP, and was not allowed to by the government. The only analysis that's been done was by the bureaucrats who negotiated it, Foreign Affairs. They don't have any macroeconomic expertise. Would you allow your Productivity Commission, or even your own department, to conduct a proper public assessment of the benefits of the TPP in order to demonstrate that it will indeed, along with other trade agreements, lead to generations of prosperity?
Well, the work has been done, Bernard, and all of the, and that is in securing these agreements. And the sceptics will always doubt the trade benefits of these sorts of deals. They're welcome to their scepticism. The government is absolutely convinced of it. That's why we've set about it. And I do believe it will provide that real prosperity for for the future of the country. Now, doing review analysis on these things after the work is being done, well, that's something that can be contemplated. But frankly, we're a bit more focused on getting on to the next set of issues that need to be addressed to back Australians in to support the transitioning economy. We don't intend to run the economy with a review measure. We intend to look forward on the things we have to do next. There's a lot to do, and that's where my attention is focused.
Peter Jean from the Adelaide Advertiser.
Peter Jean from the Advertiser, Treasurer. Treasurer, just in the past couple of hours, Arium, the owner of the Whyalla Steelworks, has indicated they may have to close the plant this year with the loss of up to 1,100 jobs. I'm just interested, do you think there is a viable future for the Australian steel industry? And in this case, is there potentially something the federal government could do to help this operator?
Well, look, I'll leave the specifics of that to the Industry Minister address, who I'm sure is far more involved in the workings of what's happening there. Over the last few years, we've seen a tremendous amount of change in our local economy, and there's been quite a lot of disruption. And I think what has changed, say, over the last couple of years to, say, 10 years ago or more than that, is Australians are coming more and more to terms with the nature of this change. And the future of our economy is in front of us, it's not behind us. And it's very important that we do all we can to help people to continue to transition. Now, where there are enterprises and operations that aren't able to continue to go forward, there needs to be other ones that take their place in new areas and in new industries, and we need to continue to support those who are making that transition from one to the next. Vocational education and training, for example, I think has a really important role to play in all of that, not just in the post-school period, but over someone's lifetime, and the ability for people to reskill and on their own initiative. One of the most depressing stories I heard when I was in my last portfolio was the story of a bloke. He was about my age and he was a carpenter, and he went up to his boss, who was a builder, and he said, look, I want to keep working for you. I like this company, but my body will only enable me to do this sort of work for so many more years. I'd like to go and do this course and that course and get some training. And the boss told him to, he wasn't interested. I thought that was a really stupid boss. What sort of better employee could you get than that? And here he was understanding the transitions that were ahead of him and what he needed to do for his family, and to remain a very positive contributor to his own enterprise. And, that's the sort of person I think we need to back in.
Our final question is from Catherine McGrath from SBS.
Treasurer, thank you very much. We're hearing a lot from ministers, particularly from you, about the problem of bracket creep, which is looking obviously like we're getting to hear more about the problem because the government is planning on doing something at budget night. So should Australians be getting prepared, and should they expect to see some action on bracket creep? Secondly, can you be a little bit reflective about this tax debate I think the country's been involved in, although I'm not sure how many citizens have really been involved in it, and now the Business Council of Australia finds itself being criticised for putting its plan out there. Has there really been an honest debate, and are you in danger of losing time to campaign on policy as we wait for the announcement of clear policies?
Well, I think what I've said today, particularly about the tax mix switch and what the decision the government has come to on the GST, I think certainly rescales and rescopes what's possible in this area now. I mean, previously, what we were looking at with $30 billion worth of income tax cuts would have delivered one of the biggest changes to income tax rates and schedules that we'd seen in 30 years or more. But we know that the cons of that argument impeded us from going forward with that plan. Now, if you're not dealing with that scope and scale, you're obviously looking at far more modest measures. So I think modest would be the way I'd seek to frame expectations around these things. At the scale of measures you've got to work with, it'd be very difficult to deal with past sins when it comes with the bracket creep. But there is a modest potential to deal with the fact that others' future sins could be committed in this area. What I mean by that is I've said a lot about the average wage earner moving into the second highest tax bracket. This is something that deeply troubles the Prime Minister and I and the whole team. And we may be able to, depending on how other issues are analysed and what they can deliver up, we may be able to prevent that outcome going forward. But when you're dealing with the situation we're dealing with, when you've got to fund it out of either a surplus, which doesn't exist, and more spending cuts, you've got to look at other tax measures that can fund the reductions in personal income tax and company tax, I should stress, and company tax. I'll let others sort of commentate on the debate we'd had over several months. I believe, because we've had enormous feedback, we had the Rethink paper, which was put out last year, received thousands of submissions. There was a lot of feedback into that process. There's continued to be a lot of dialogue around these issues, both in the public space and directly with members and directly with me and the Prime Minister in the short time we've been in these roles. But you've got to come to a landing point. You've got to make some decisions on the big threshold issues. I think today I've explained the process for how we've done that. We could have made an earlier decision. If we were going to make it on the politics, we decided to make the decision on the policy, and that's how we'll make future decisions. And as we move forward to the budget will be a budget that seeks to back Australians who are working and who are saving and investing. Thank you.